How do we generate data center decommissioning projects? How do we generate data center decommissioning projects? Yeah, I've actually worked on this one with a couple of clients already. So the interesting part with AI and high performance compute is it's making a lot of legacy data centers obsolete. In the same way that if you've worked in your career in IT, you know that back in the heyday of Windows desktop and server, literally were operating systems that were forcing a hardware refresh cycle, right? So in a lot of the same ways, AI and HPC, high performance compute, is actually forcing a data center facility refresh cycle, because a lot of the legacy facilities just don't have the power. They don't have the density to be able to support the kind of requirements going forward. So to generate data center decommissioning projects, we need to recognize that there's going to be a lot of legacy data centers that are decommissioned purely for that reason. And there's going to be a hand-me-down effect going on to a certain degree. On our podcast, I interviewed someone who was a former operations executive for one of the big three hyperscalers. And we're talking through like what happens to these facilities after 2-3 years. And almost certainly that's when the real estate people, the DCRE, the data center real estate folks, get involved, because one person's cast-offs are another operator's treasures. So this is where a former facility from one of the big three hyperscalers gets acquired by one of the outsourced hyperscalers or one of the big national or global colocation facilities. And there, as it trades down from the big national or global colocation providers, when they pull the plug, when they decommission something 5 years later, some of their facilities get passed down to the next level, the small regional or the local providers. And in some cases, when there's no utility left on any of that stuff, it gets taken out of commission as a data center completely, and it gets converted to, it used to be office space, but with now so many people working from home and remote teams, it's going to different uses, maybe industrial space, maybe it's getting repurposed residential, maybe it's community space, maybe it's getting level to the ground, and most of the value from that real estate has to do with the power and telecommunications lines that are coming in, and it needs to be thought of from that sense, or maybe it becomes an edge facility. Either way, there's a ton of decommissioning projects that are going on now because AI is forcing a lot of these decision points around. So the best way to know about this is to be perpetually building a brand and being known in the space as a company that does great work on decommissioning projects. So we need to understand what geographic regions you can truly cover with your team. And then we need to understand what company sizes you're best in working on complex decommissioning projects for. Like, for example, does your team really have the capability to work with all size data center operators? Are you equally as effective decommissioning 3 data centers from a small regional company or decommissioning some massive facilities from large hyperscalers or global data center operators? And again, you can answer that question based on your talent and process and expertise and capital that you're able to deploy with all this. But yeah, you need to understand like the regions you can operate and the company sizes you can operate. Once you've done that, it'll enable you to build a finite list of target accounts that you want to grow these relationships with over time. Probably anywhere from a couple dozen to maybe most likely a couple hundred, in some cases a couple thousand kinds of companies that you think are going to have decommissioning projects coming up in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, whatever it is. And then we need to understand who the stakeholders are in those companies that we want to build relationships with. When it comes to decommissioning, it depends entirely on the size of the data center that's being decommissioned. What are the most appropriate roles to build these relationships with? In large enough facilities, there's going to be decommissioning, whole decommissioning teams that you work with, their counterparts to your team. In smaller companies, this could be as a couple dozen employees. You may be dealing directly with an owner or a CEO or CTO or something like that, and everything in between. But how many different hats, how many different roles they have will depend immensely depending on the size of the data center that you're doing this decommissioning work. But yeah, once you have an idea of the most likely couple hundred companies that you want to build relationships with, how can you create content that allows and experiences and events that allows you to stay with them throughout their full life cycle, throughout their full journey? So I would look to do things like hosting a weekly podcast where each week you interview a different decommissioning expert, either from other companies, other outsourced companies in your space, or internal resources that are experts on decommissioning. I'd host live streams and webinars on these topics on a regular basis. And of course, the topics that you talk about on all of these should be a function of what you discover when you do your buyer persona research, the biggest goals and challenges, because you want to make sure that you're not just seen as a decommissioning vendor. You want to make sure that your company and your team are seen as the definitive go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with data center commissioning. And in today's world, where so much of the journey is over before sales contact, we need to make sure that we're able to get in early and often in the self-propelled journey. And the way to do this is content and events experiences, elite experiences that really enable you to do a ton of great education and trust building with the most important stakeholders in these companies, so you stay with them throughout their full journey, throughout as many of the 28 touch points as possible. So you're nearly guaranteed to be on the short list as they get a little further down and they start to knock out and qualify versus disqualify certain companies that they want to work with. And these are massive, massive projects. I've talked to people where they're literally taking millions or tens, 8 figures in equipment out of the facility and getting a chance to be able to recycle. And they do partnerships and deals on rev shares and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's about really understanding your target addressable market. It's understanding the defined companies, the target account list of companies that have these decommissioning projects. It's about understanding the stakeholders and building relationships so you stay with them throughout the full journey. If you're just using outbound and trying to force these meetings all the time, you may not be selling how they actually want to buy. I guess in theory, if you're selling to people that are 40, 50 years into their career and they're still doing business the same way they did in the 1990s, knock yourself out. But if you're selling to a more balanced decision committee, a more balanced company where you're dealing with a mix of a little bit of baby boomers, a lot of Gen X, a lot of millennials, some Gen Z, you need to understand just how much the journey's changed over the past 10 years, where nearly all of it is over before vendor contact. And the only way that we're going to get you in there early and often is to show up as the teachers, to show up as the consultants, to show up as the experts. You can do that, or one of your competitors is going to do it, or there's going to be a media or events company or channel company or something like that that's going to show up and fill that void. But understand, they're learning from someone. If they learn from you, this can be a dramatic accelerator in the quality and the quantity of your relationships for these decommissioning projects. If you're trying to act as if your decommissioning clients don't know about these things and they're still doing faxes, and they're still doing postal mail, they're still getting all their information from print trade publications. In other words, you think that they're still living in the early 2000s or the 1990s. I don't know what to tell you except get more self-aware about who they are, what they care about, and what their preferences are when it comes to anything and everything having to do with their decommissioning needs.